Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, I've got a very interesting EQ pedal to show you. It's brand new on the market from a brand new UK based pedal company, so it's very exciting to be checking it out today. This here is the Morphtone from Muir Audio Design. Now this pedal really is a Swiss Army knife for your pedal board. You can use it in some very simple ways, but also do some really quite complex things with it. So first and foremost today, I'm going to plug a guitar into it, plug it directly into an amplifier, and talk you through the basic philosophy behind this pedal and how you use it. But at the end, I'm going to delve into some of the more kind of intricate things it can do and give you some more creative ideas for how you might integrate this into your guitar rig, because the possibilities are pretty much endless with all the functionality this pedal has. So let's get it plugged in and see what's what. Okay, so I've got the Morphtone plugged in front of me here, and straight away there's a feature about it that I love. Inside the pedal you get a small trim pot to control the brightness of the LED. Now this is going to sound very Spinal Tap here, but on a lot of modern pedals the LEDs are so super bright they can really dazzle you. And especially as someone who demos pedals, I have to put a camera right over the top of the pedal. And in many of my videos I have to cut out bits of card and paper and stick them over the LED to avoid them destroying the camera shot. Now today I've turned the LED brightness almost all the way down. So at the top here you can still see when the pedal's engaged or not, but it's not bleaching the camera. So it's a very simple piece of functionality that I really wish other pedal manufacturers would start to include in their designs. Because if you're someone who plays a lot of very dark stages, for example, a super bright LED could be really blinding. On this pedal you can turn it down. So I really like that right off the bat. Now the very basic philosophy behind the Morphtone is you get two different EQs that you can blend between. That's the very, very short answer of what this pedal is all about. But as I said, it's capable of a huge amount more besides just that. Now this is a pedal that's designed to work with a large array of different sound sources, and the real indication of that is this switch right on the front end of the circuit, because you can run the pedal in unity gain mode, you can add a 10 dB boost to your input signal, or engage a 10 dB pad or cut to the input signal. So if you're working with a synthesizer, for example, which has a very hot line level signal, you can drop that by 10 dB on the front end of the pedal so it doesn't overload any of the internal circuitry, it doesn't clip and distort, and then correct the level on the output. Or if you're working with an acoustic guitar DI, which is typically a very low level signal, you can boost that up by 10 dB for a better signal to noise ratio going through the EQ, and again adjust the level on the output. Now today I'm pretty much going to leave it in unity gain mode because that's the one that makes the most sense for an electric guitar, but you can use it in a wide variety of different situations with that switch. Now, with the morph control here set round to the blue, you'll just hear the blue side of the pedal. And with the depth control all the way down, the EQ is basically bypassed. So set as it is currently, this pedal is going to be acting only as a kind of buffer and line driver. So I'm going to show you the bypassed sound of the pedal with the guitar going straight into the amp, and then engage the Morphtone, and you'll hear that nothing much really changes, but the top end becomes a little brighter. Now the reason for that is because the pedal is going to be buffering the signal. So the high impedance signal that comes from these pickups is going to be converted to a low impedance signal, and the effect of that is it basically negates the capacitance in the cable that then goes off to the amp. So the pedal isn't adding high end as such, it's stopping high end getting lost further down the line. You can think of it like that. But overall, it's just a very nice, fairly transparent tone enhancer. So a little bit brighter, but overall it just kind of makes the guitar sound better almost. It gives a subtle enhancing effect by retaining that top end further down the line. But as we start to bring the depth control up, we'll start to hear the EQ on the blue side. And to me, the blue side of this pedal is more of a broad brushstroke EQ. It's similar to what you would find on an effects pedal with just a single tone control, or even something like an old 18-watt Marshall that just has a single tone knob. As you turn it up, things get brighter and thinner. Turn it down, it gets darker and thicker. So it's very intuitive, but just a very nice, pleasing, sorted EQ. And as you turn the depth up more and more, the effect of the EQ becomes much more obvious. So if you just tickle the depth in a little bit, we're talking very subtle changes. But as you turn it up, things start to sound a lot more obviously filtered. So I'm just going to run through a few of the sounds that you can get out of just the blue side of this pedal, but it's just a very lovely, quite basic, but very pleasing EQ. So a very pleasing EQ with a lot of very powerful tone shaping. You can really darken things up and make them very mellow and warm and jazzy. You can really thin things out for a kind of Vox type effect. At certain settings, the mid-range EQ is very scoopy, a bit like a sort of blackface Fender. So a lot of very clever tone shaping happening on just the blue side. Now let's morph over to the red side. And to me, the red side is much more of a kind of forensic EQ. It's much more surgical. So you can basically select a certain band of frequencies and boost or cut them. So we have the frequency control here that sets the center point of the frequency band we're going to be manipulating. And we get 3 bands to work within: low, mid, and high. Now, low mode is a little bit too low for a 6-string electric. It's more geared towards bass guitar, which we'll get into later on. I think it goes from like 30 hertz up to about 400 hertz. So very, very sort of sub-bassy if you want it to be. The mid band is much more sort of friendly to the 6-string electric. It goes from about 300 Hz up to 2.5K, I think, from memory. The high band goes from about 1.8K up to 22K. So super bright presency sort of frequencies for bringing out the top end chime on an acoustic guitar, for example. Again, not necessarily the most friendly band to 6-string electric, but a lot of very sort of powerful tone shaping within those 3 bands, and of course where you set the frequency knob within each band dictates the center point of the frequencies that you're going to be manipulating. Now, the width control here, if you know anything about EQs and how they work, especially if you come from the sort of recording studio background, the width control is basically the Q factor. So if you turn the width down, you're going to be boosting quite a large band of frequencies. But as you turn it up, the frequency band kind of narrows and becomes much more targeted. And all the way up, I think it goes up to a Q factor of about 30, which is a very thin slither of frequencies that you're going to be working with. Now, you also get the notch and peak switch. As the name would suggest, peak is an EQ boost, notch is an EQ cut. So depending on where you set that will really change how the red side of this pedal works. So with quite a low Q factor in notch mode, you could scoop out a lot of mid-range for an 80s metal sound if you wanted to. But when you tighten the Q factor up, you can find problem frequencies in guitars and amps and pickups and remove them. So you can be a lot more surgical with the red side. But because we can isolate very narrow frequency bands, this is the side of the pedal that gives us those kind of cocktoir telephone type effects. It's much more of a special effect if you want it to be the red side. So again, I could go on for hours on just this one side, but I'm going to cycle through a few tones it's capable of and just show you some of the effects you can achieve with the red side of this pedal. So as I said, you can go on for hours just playing around with really heavily filtered sounds. But it's a lot of fun. And a lot of those very isolated sounds in the upper mid-range presency frequencies, on their own, they're really abrasive. They really hurt the eardrums. But when we use it in conjunction with the morph control, things start to get very, very interesting. So I'm going to set everything as kind of straight up, just fairly arbitrarily, and move round back to the blue side. So I'm now going to show you how you can combine these two sides and they're voiced to work together really nicely for some very interesting effects. So the sound of this wide range telly straight into the JTM 45 sounds like this. And with the buffering effect of the pedal, it's that little bit more chimey. So let's creatively use these two sides to create something a little bit different. So let's say that overall I want to darken this guitar and thin it out a little bit. So that's where the blue side comes in, the broad brushstroke side. So I'm going to turn the tone down and nudge the depth up a little bit. So that should darken and thin the guitar slightly. So I'll go to the extreme there. It doesn't necessarily sound great on its own, but let's say that's the effect we're after for a certain guitar part. But it's lacking in a little bit of bite there, isn't it? It's quite warm and mellow, but I want it to cut through the mix a little bit more, and I can't achieve that with just a single tone knob. So let's go back round to the red side and find a frequency in these wide range humbuckers that really seems to be pleasing in terms of cutting through a mix. Might not sound great on its own, but it's really going to get stuck in your eardrum. So that's really going to get you heard, but on its own, it sounds a bit grim. So let's go back round to the sound we had originally and start to blend that kind of ear-piercing sound in a little bit and watch what effect it has. So that's just one of infinite examples of how you can blend the two sides together. So we took this guitar, we darkened it a bit and thinned it out, so we just kind of shifted the overall frequency response to this guitar, but it was lacking a little bit of snap, so we could blend that back in. But each EQ on its own there doesn't sound fantastic, but the two together really, really works for a very creative, filtered sound that would sit nicely in a dense rock mix. On its own, a little bit questionable, but it will work in a mix very nicely. And of course, you can carry on with this sort of thing forever. But that's the basic functionality of this pedal, blending those two EQs together creatively. One is a broad brushstroke, another is a much more targeted EQ, but the two together with infinite adjustment between the two can be a very handy tool to have on your pedal board. But there's a couple of elements to this pedal we haven't even touched on yet, and that is the pre and post loops. Now these loops sit within the circuitry of the pedal, so they're bypassed by the foot switch, and it completely removes whatever you put in the loops from your signal path. So if we go back to having this set as a clean always on unity buffer, we could use this as a true bypass looper for an old pedal with a bit of tone suck and whatever. If we don't want it in our signal path all the time, we can put it into one of the Morphtone's loops and completely remove it from the signal path when this pedal is turned off. And I think from what I've read and heard about this pedal from Colin, the designer, that's the intended use of the Morphtone, is almost to create a hybrid pedal by having other pedals in the loops and turning them all on and off with one foot stomp, and having the EQ circuitry in the middle to really manipulate the sounds and blend between the two different EQs. That's how this pedal is primarily designed to be used. So I think the best way of demonstrating the ways to do this are by going through some of the more creative ways that I've been enjoying using this pedal. So some of them are very, very simple, others will be slightly more complicated, but I'll tell you exactly what I'm doing and show you the tonal effects you can achieve by using the Morphtone more creatively. Right, so the first and possibly most simple way of using the Morphtone is by bypassing the EQ entirely and just using the very powerful output level control to push an amplifier. So I've set my JTM45 just at the edge of breakup, and then I'm going to use the Morphtone's level control, which I think is up to about 30 dB of boost when you properly crank it, to push the amp into more distortion. So just the level control, even bypassing the EQ, works great for taking a slightly crunchy amp and just nudging it that bit further in some thicker, creamier saturation. So it works very nicely as a simple clean boost. Now the second way that I've really been enjoying using the Morphtone is a little bit gimmicky, I suppose. It's the stereotypical cocked wah type effect. So I'm going to use just the red side of the pedal, isolate a fairly narrow band of mid-range frequencies and push them nice and hard into the amp, so that when I engage the pedal, the overall level of saturation doesn't really change too much, despite a lot of the signal then not being there. It's something of a special effect, but people like Brad Paisley have used it to great effect over the years, and it can be a lot of fun to play around with. Right, something for the gigging guitarists here. One thing a lot of people struggle with is going between guitars of different styles on stage, because if you dial your pedals and your amp in to sound phenomenal with your Strat, for example, what if you then want to play a 3-3-5 style of guitar? Will this guitar work with the rig that's dialed in for a very different instrument? So can we use the Morphtone with just one of these guitars to make it sound a little bit closer to the other to the point where a pre-existing rig works. So let's listen to these two guitars just going straight into the front end of the amp to see how they fundamentally differ. So as expected, the Strat sounded much thinner and much spankier, didn't it? But let's say that I'm a Strat guy, right? And I'm playing a gig with my Strat, but 3 songs from the interval I break a string, and the only spare guitar I've got is this. This isn't going to work with the same pedal settings and the same amp settings as the Strat. So can we use the Morphtone to make this sound more equivalent to the Strat to get through to the interval where we can change the string on our prized Strat? So what I'm going to do is use the blue side of the Morphtone to really thin this guitar out and add some top end, and then find a resonant frequency on the red side that seems to really kind of match the Strat and blend it in just a little bit. Now this guitar has a slightly hotter output than the Strat, but by thinning out the low end, that's more than going to make up for that. So I'll adjust the level so the two guitars are broadly similar. But to get us through to the interval when we can have a pint and change our string, can the Morphtone get us out of trouble? Let's find out. So yes, we can absolutely take one of those guitars and make it more ballpark to the other, to the point where it works through the same rig. So if you're gigging and you only have one single coil guitar and one humbucker guitar, but you need to make one slightly more equivalent to the other to really make it work for you live, the Morphtone can absolutely be your get out of jail free card for that. Now, this is a very large guitar that I don't understand because I am not a bass player. And to top it off, I've plugged it into a guitar amplifier because I don't know what I'm doing. So on its own, this is never going to sound too fantastic. So it's quite thin and a little bit plinky. So can we use the Morphtone to get us out of trouble once again? So I'm going to use the blue side of the Morphtone to darken this up and really thicken it out a lot. And because I'm not a bass player, I have terrible technique playing bass with my fingers, I use a pick. And that gives a lot of that horrible sort of pick attack sound. So using the red side, I've found that pick attack frequency and I've notched it out. So we're darkening it up, we're thickening it out, and we're getting rid of that horrible pick frequency whilst pushing the amp a little bit for a bit of extra meat. So watch what happens when I turn the Morphtone on now. We can take my weedy sounding bass and get it a few steps closer to sounding like Lemmy. So the Morphtone works fantastic on bass as well. But now I want to delve into what these loops can do. How can we use those for some very interesting and useful effects? Now this here is my vintage electric mistress from the late 1970s. Probably one of the best pedals ever made. It's an absolutely stunning sounding flanger. But it does have a few quirks about it, and one of the most notable ones is, even with the pedal bypass, there's quite a lot of what you would call tone suck. So have a listen to what the difference is between my guitar going straight into the front end of the amp and my guitar going into the bypassed mistress and then off to the amp. So with the pedal in bypass, it really is a tone sucker. You get a level drop and a real darkening of the top end. So you couldn't really have the Mistress on your pedalboard without being in some sort of looper, right? So what I've done is I've put the Mistress in the post loop of the Morphtone. Now the Morphtone will of course buffer the signal, which I don't necessarily want in this instance, so I'm going to use a little bit of the blue EQ to actually darken the guitar sound so that it more closely matches the bypassed sound with the capacitance of the cable. But I'm also going to boost the level to compensate for the level drop. So in the first instance, we've basically created a true bypass looper for our electric Mistress that also corrects the level drop. So we can have our Mistress on stage. When we engage the Morphtone, the level doesn't drop, the guitar signal is broadly unchanged. So then I can kick my electric Mistress on with a lot of background noise and use the Morphtone basically as a true bypass switcher, but also matching the levels and the EQ. So we can use our nice vintage Mistress on stage, we can remove the background noise when we don't want it, and there's no tone suck when we don't want to use it, but we can bring it in without a level drop, without an EQ change, and we can kind of correct the shortcomings of that amazing vintage pedal. So what about the pre-loop then? Well, let's take another pedal that has a bit of a reputation, an old Boss DS1. Absolute classic pedal, but a couple of things are known pretty widely about this. Firstly, the EQ shape is very mid-scooped, and even as you turn the tone knob up, it kind of sounds like a tin of bees. It doesn't really give you more mid-range. So lots of pedal modders like Analog Man and Keeley offer a mid-range mod for an old DS1. But also, with the level control all the way up, it barely gets above Unity. But it's still an amazing sound. Take a listen. So it's a killer sound. It sounds like 80s hair metal. But the DS1, as I said, does have some quirks. Vintage Boss pedals were also not known for the quality of their buffered bypass. It just about gets up to Unity volume, but it's not going to make you leap out of the mix for a solo. And it's one of those guitar sounds that's wonderfully satisfying here in the room and listening to it in isolation, but the moment you try and put it into a dense rock mix or into a track, the first thing you're going to need to do is EQ some mid-range into it. So I've put the DS1 into the pre-loop of the Morphtone. So the guitar is going into the Morphtone, through the DS1 and then into the EQ circuitry. So I'm going to use the blue side primarily to really thicken the DS1 up even more than it already is. And then I'm going to find a snarly mid-frequency with the red side and blend it in just enough to get me heard in a mix. I don't want to change the sound of the pedal too much. I just want to add some of those frequencies that are really going to jump out. And of course, I'm then going to boost the output level into the amp to really hoof the front end in a way that the DS1 can't on its own. So right now, the Morphtone is acting as a true bypass switcher, but once I stand on it, it will engage the DS1 and the EQ and the level boost. So as I was saying in the introduction, the Morphtone really is a Swiss Army knife of a pedal, and it can really solve a lot of problems. And using it to fix quirks of vintage pedals and really make them work in a mix or a band context is one of my favourite things to do with it. It really excels in that capacity, I think. Now, as a sort of finale, I wanted to show that you can use both the pre and the post loops together and activate them both using just one stomp of the foot switch. So in the pre-loop, I'm going to put the Williams Audio Mark II tone bender. Now the pre-loop is very cleverly designed because it's before any circuitry that might buffer your guitar signal. So you can absolutely use fuzzers in the pre-loop. The cleanup still works, they don't misbehave, even though you're adding a lot of extra things to it with a foot switch. So the pre-loop's going to have the fuzz in it. It's then going to go into the Morphtone, and I'm going to dial in a ridiculous honky, middly, barky EQ and really push the level. And then in the post loop, I'm going to put the Boss Dimension C chorus pedal. So there's a lot of things happening all at once here, but again, it's activated with just one foot switch of the Morphtone. So bear with me here, this might get loud and pretty messy, but without further ado, here we go. So there we are, folks, the Muir Audio Morphtone EQ. Now please do comment underneath and let me know what you thought of this pedal today. Did you like the ways that I used it? Would you use it differently? I love chatting nerdy guitar stuff with you folks about all this sort of stuff. So that was a very small handful of the almost infinite possibilities you can have with this pedal. You can dial it in so many different ways with different pedals and the different loops, and it seems equally at home, just subtly enhancing what you've already got, as it is drastically changing everything and making a huge racket. It's a very impressive piece of kit, and as I've said throughout, it can solve so many different problems depending on the situation you find yourself in. But those are just my thoughts, folks. Please do let me know yours underneath. I love hearing from you guys on all this sort of stuff. So thank you ever so much for watching. I hope this video was interesting and useful for you. Please do carry on subscribing. I know I always say it, but it makes a huge difference when you hit subscribe. And I will see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.